Hey my friends, Miss Rachel here, and it's time for another Teen Craft Academy. So this week we're doing animation exploration. So what does that mean? We're going to do sort of a quick overview of several different kinds of simple animation techniques you can use. So flipbooks, zoetropes, stop motion animation. But we're actually not going to focus on the ins and outs of those particular types of animation so much as general techniques and why animation works the way it does. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with a simple flipbook and then we'll expand from there. All right, let's go. Okay, before we get into actually drawing anything, we're actually going to use something that already has our images on it. So this is a reaction GIF flipbook, which you may have seen. I posted about it earlier. Just a simple reaction GIF using images from the internet, and we can make it move just like we would on a computer just by using it as a flipbook. Now, how does that work? Why does that work on the computer and in real life? Well, you might say that animation is magic, and I don't mean like Harry Potter cast a spell magic. I mean like a magician that you go to a show and they perform an illusion and trick your brain. So what we're doing is we're tricking our brains. So all animation is made of images that show up very quickly, one after another. So this is another animated GIF flipbook in process. You can see each of these images, it's one simple still image printed out. Now, as you flip through a flipbook, you show each of these images for a certain amount of time, less than a second, much less than a second. We call each of these still images a frame. So the speed at which they go, that's frames per second. Now you may have heard that if you like video games. A lot of video games will talk about frames per second. And you'll hear like a really good game has 60 frames per second, and maybe other games might have 30 frames per second, or old games might have 15 frames per second. With animation, it's not interactive, so you don't need as much of that reactivity as you would need with a video game. So 60 frames per second, that's a little bit more than what we need. For hand-drawn animation that you see on TV or what have you, that's usually something like 24 frames per second, and each frame is actually shown twice. It's called going on 2. Now, flipbook, this is a lot simpler even. So we're going to aim for like 10 to 12 frames per second. So what does that mean? Okay, I have on this flipbook, I go to the end here, I have 29. So round to 30, say 10 frames per second, this would be like a 3-second long flipbook. And what you do is you just show these images in rapid succession. That's what the flipping motion is. Now, for a flipbook, it's very simple. We take those images, we put them all in order, and we make sure that they are all the same size and they line up. If you're right-handed, you want it to line up on the right side. If you're left-handed, you can actually do the same thing, just line the images up on the left side so it's a little easier for you. And we want those in order. Now, see here that I had about 30 frames. I also have a bunch of blank ones in the back here, and that's because when you're flipping a flipbook, it gets a lot harder to flip the closer you are to the end, especially if you have a thinner paper, especially if your flipbook is short. So it's useful to have some blank pages at the end. Now you can see I don't have any blank pages on this one, which means when I get to the end, it kind of gets choppy, right? So for this one, we're going to line all these up. You can see I have these numbered on this side so that I make sure that they're in the right order. You want to make sure, now my cutting job wasn't the best here, so I'm going to just make sure that they line up along this edge. This is the important edge. So long as the images are lined up on this edge, we're good. And this one, you can see I bound. So I glued each of these pages together and then I used some tape to reinforce that. If you don't want to go through that, it can be tedious. You can just take a binder clip and clip it together here. So oops, I moved those around. And what's nice about flipbooks is that you, until you have it bound, you can edit it to your heart's content. we go. So we have another flipbook. This one works a little better at the end because it has those extra pages. Now, okay, those are flipbooks that we've made when we already have our images. What do we do if we want to draw images from scratch? Now, there's a concept in animation called keyframes. So, remember, each of our images is a frame. Keyframes are like the important poses. So, let's say I want to draw an animation of a guy who is jumping. And I'm gonna start right here. I'm gonna just do a stick figure for clarity and for time's sake. So let's think, what are the key poses for jumping? All right, so first you wanna stand. And what's the next thing that's most important with the jump? You need like the squat down pose, and then you need the pose where you're in the air, and then the pose where you land, right? So these are all keyframes. Now those are 3 frames, right? That's not gonna give us our 10 to 12 frames per second. So what we'll wanna do is we'll want to draw those keyframes first, and then we're gonna draw the in-betweens. So the frames that go in between those things, those are called in-betweens or tweens. Now, for copying your images across to make sure that they are in the right place and they aren't jumping back and forth in this, you'll want to trace. And you're going to want to trace if you're using a thicker paper like this. So I'm using blank note cards right now, and that's going to work better than printer paper. It's going to be more solid and it's going to hold up more. But you're going to want to use some kind of light from underneath. Now I have a light box. You don't have to use a light box though. One thing you can do that is a neat trick is you can take a Tupperware and you can shine a flashlight up through that, or you can use your phone or a computer or a tablet and use that as a light box. Now, if you're going to use a device to act as your light box, it actually works best if you open a picture that's just a big blank square and fill your whole screen with that. So there's nothing that's showing through that's going to be distracting. But let's do our keyframes for this. I'm going to turn this around so it's right side up for you, but it's going to be upside down for me. That's okay. Now, dark lines are obviously going to show through better. So if you need to, you can darken your lines. I know with sketching in general, you say, oh, start with really light sketches. Well, in this case, it might be better to be dark. So now I'm going to start with the feet because this animation that we're doing is all grounded, right? So it's until we get up in the air, these feet are going to be the most important part because this whole upper section is going to move down. So we're going to start with the feet, and now we want him bending his legs. So I'm going to go about halfway down where his hips were, and then there, and then I'm going to bend his knees. Give him my head again. And arms. So, now, we've got him standing, we've got him squatting, getting ready to jump. Now, this whole seeing frames through your frames kind of idea, a word for that shows up in a lot of animation software or animation in general, which is onion framing, or onion skinning rather. So being able to see each of your frames is very useful. I'm going to go through, I'm going to make my next keyframe. So he's going to be up in the air now. So I know his head is here when he's not jumping. It's down here. You want to make sure his head is up high. Give him that same. And we want this very exaggerated motion, so we're going to have him reaching up while he jumps. We'll have his feet pointing down. So, now, we have 3 keyframes. We'll want probably to have a similar keyframe for when he lands to this one, because that's where you have that ground motion. We're going to make it slightly different. not. Got his elbows out anymore. Maybe he's got his hands down. Okay, so we've got our keyframes. Now this is not gonna move. The speed of this is gonna not be quite what we're looking for, right? Because, you know, we know 12 frames per second. But we got 1, 2, 3, 4. We flip through this real slowly. You can see very basic animation. Now, we know where we're starting, we know where we're going. We need to draw in between frames. So, let's focus on this one. Okay. So, if you could lay this card on both of them, that would be really good. It could be hard because it's thick. It's a little difficult to see, but you can kind of see it. If you get to the point where you can't see this very well, what you do is just turn the light off in the room. The less light there is around, the easier it's going to see this back one. Now, I'm going to change something here. You know this head is up here? I want to actually smush it down lower. I actually want to make it a little bit flatter. Now, why would I make his head flat instead of round? There's a concept for animation called stretch and squash. So if you were to draw a bouncing ball, you might want to just do ball, 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 ball. Have those be your images, but that would actually feel really, really boring and static. So remember that what animation is it's tricking your brain. So what we would do, well, we'll have it fall, and we're gonna have it sort of stretch towards where it's going to fall. So the impact, we want it to smoosh down, and then we want it to stretch back up. So it's at its regular thing. So you see how it stretches out and smashes down? That's gonna give it a lot more motion and weight and strength to your motion. So it's gonna make it feel a lot more powerful when it springs. So now we have our first section between keyframe and keyframe. We've got our tweets. Okay, so now we've got our friend who's jumping. Now, flipping a flipbook can be hard. Turn this up. So, if you put your thumb kind of on top like this, it's gonna get chunky. So it's better put your finger along the edge here and keep it light. Even sort of rock it a little bit. So, that same kind of picture thing can be used what's called a Zootrope. Now I've got this. This is a template I got online. It actually came from the Children's Museum, and there I will link to that. This is a template for making a Zootrope. So what you would do is you would draw each of your frames right underneath these white lines, and those white lines will get cut out. So you cut them out, and then you would tape them in a circle, and you would tape that to something round, like say a CD. And unlike a flipbook where you see the whole thing and you just switch from frame to frame, this works by hiding the other frames from you until you spin it. The faster you spin it, faster the image goes. Now this doesn't work very well on my finger. It would work better if we had a axle in here. If you look, keep your eye right in one spot, what you can see is it shows those images going from one and another. And this was a very common old style of animation before television and movies. You would have something like this where it would be a hand crank and it would spin it around. If you'd like to try that kind instead, you can download this and I will upload the link to the instructions there. Same kind of principles apply to stop motion animation. So I made this little fella here out of Connects. And how would I animate him? Okay, so I would have one frame like this, and then I would take a photo, right? So with stop motion animation, it's important to keep everything in the same place each time. Now, with the stop motion puppet, you would have something that's got wires and it would have really strong joints and stuff so that you can bend it. The body may be made out of clay, so you can actually literally do that squash and stretch with clay. This, we can't do that as much, but we are still gonna do a little bit. So each time I move it, I am taking a new photo. So I've got my camera. Now, I could put each of these images in sequence on a digital screen. I could use something as simple as PowerPoint and then just time each slide as if it were a frame. I could use animation software. I could drop these into a movie editor. Or if I just took them with my phone, I could just flip between them quickly, or a flipbook. You would get the general idea. So these all work with the same principle.
So just remember, all animation is images in sequence, tricking your brain. And using those images, you can create animation magic. Thanks for watching.